The drawer was always locked. My father made that clear before he passed. The key stayed around my neck on a thin silver chain, and the documents inside, the ones that transferred the family property to me, stayed safe. That was the plan. That was what my father wanted. I had followed his instructions for 3 months after the funeral, keeping the documents close, keeping quiet, keeping the peace. Our family home was large and old, full of memories that felt heavier now that he was gone. My brother, Felix, had moved back in 2 weeks after the burial. He said it was to help. I believed him then. On a Tuesday morning, I came downstairs and reached for the drawer out of habit. My hand found it open. The lock had been forced. I stood very still, staring at the scratched metal. Then I heard Felix behind me. I turned slowly. He was leaning against the door frame, holding my inheritance documents loosely in one hand, the way someone holds a newspaper they have already read. He was smiling. Not the smile of a man who had found something by accident. It was the smile of a man who had been planning this for a long time. Shock moved through me like cold water. Then something harder followed right behind it. I did not scream. I did not reach for the documents or demand he hand them back. Every instinct told me to fight, to grab, to make him see how wrong this was. I pushed all of it down. I forced my face into something calm. I even managed a small, confused smile, like I was not sure what I was looking at. "What are you doing with those?" I asked. My voice came out steady. Felix shrugged one shoulder, still smiling. "Just looking," he said. "Had no idea Dad left you everything." The word everything landed with weight. He said it like it tasted bitter. I kept my expression mild. "They're just old papers," I said. "Nothing urgent." He set the documents on the counter like they meant nothing. I picked them up slowly, flipped through, as if checking they were all there, then tucked them under my arm and walked upstairs. I waited until my door was closed. Then I sat on the edge of my bed and breathed. He had read them. Maybe he had photographed them. I did not know yet. But I knew one thing with complete certainty. Felix believed he had just found the key to everything. And I had just decided not to stop him. Not yet. That afternoon I went quiet. I moved through the house like nothing had changed. I made tea. I watched television. I answered Felix's small talk with small answers. But inside I was already working. The first thing I needed to know was how much he had seen and what he planned to do with it. I started with the house security camera my father had installed near the front door. Felix did not know it existed. I checked the footage on my phone from my locked room. It showed Felix entering the study at 6:42 that morning while I was still asleep. He had a screwdriver. He spent 11 minutes at the drawer. He left carrying the documents and his phone. I noted the time. 11 minutes was enough to photograph every page. Then I checked the family group calendar. Felix had added 2 new appointments in the last week, both listed simply as meeting, with no location and no details. I wrote down the dates. Then I went through his jacket, which he always left on the hook near the back door. In the inside pocket, folded carefully, was a receipt. It was from a stationery shop 3 towns over. He had bought specialty paper, the kind used for official-looking documents. My stomach tightened. He was not just keeping the documents. He was planning to do something with them. The next day, I found a reason to visit my cousin Adiz. She lived 20 minutes away and had always been sharp, the kind of person who noticed things other people missed. I kept my questions light. I asked how she thought Felix was handling the grief. I mentioned that he seemed stressed. Adiz was quiet for a moment, then she said, "He's been talking to people. I don't know who. But he told our Aunt Beezy that Dad had changed the will before he died." I kept my face still. My father had not changed the will. I had seen the final version myself. Did he say anything else? I asked. Adiz looked at me carefully. "He said you had the documents, but that they were outdated. That there was a newer version." I nodded slowly. So that was his plan. He was going to claim a newer document existed. One that he would create using that specialty paper and whatever photographs he had taken from my originals. I felt isolated in that moment, surrounded by a family that was already hearing his version of events. But underneath the isolation, something else was growing. A kind of cold, focused energy. Before I left, Adiz touched my arm. "Be careful," she whispered. "He has done things like this before. And from what I've heard, it goes deeper than you know." 2 days later, Felix called everyone for a family dinner. He framed it as a chance to talk about the house and honor our father's memory. I came downstairs in a plain dress and sat across from him at the long table. Our Aunt Beezy was there. Our younger sister, Nkechi, sat beside me. 2 cousins filled the other seats. Felix had placed the documents on the table in front of him, inside a clear plastic folder. He had not shown them to anyone yet. He was building to it. He talked about our father with warmth, and people laughed and wiped their eyes. He was good at this. He knew how to make a room feel safe. I watched his hands. I watched the small movements of his eyes. Twice he glanced at me to check my reaction. I gave him nothing. I asked Aunt Beezy about her garden. I helped Nkechi with the serving. I laughed at the right moments. Inside, I was noting everything. The way he kept touching the plastic folder. The way he spoke about the house using we instead of she. And at the end of dinner, when he leaned back and smiled at me with that quiet confidence, I smiled back. He thought he was the smartest person in that room. I needed him to keep thinking that. After the dinner, I spent 3 evenings going through my father's old files. He had kept everything. Tax records, letters, old contracts, property agreements going back 15 years. I was looking for patterns for anything that matched what Adiz had hinted at. I found it in a folder labeled Resolved. 3 years ago, our father had lent Felix a significant amount of money to start a small business. Felix had signed a repayment agreement. The business had closed. The money had never been repaid. My father had written a single note at the top of the document in red pen. "Felix says he will fix this. I hope so." He never had. I kept digging. In another folder, I found an old property agreement for a small piece of land our grandfather had left to the family. The agreement had 3 signatures, mine, Felix's, and my father's. But the terms were wrong. I knew what we had agreed to. These terms gave Felix more than his share. I compared the signature on that document to signatures on other papers from the same year. Something was slightly off. The letters were close, but not quite right. I wrote everything down in a small notebook I kept hidden in my room. My father had trusted Felix again and again. Felix had used that trust, and now he was doing it to me. A week passed. I started leaving small clues in plain sight, the way you might leave a trail of breadcrumbs to see which direction something moves. I left an empty envelope on the kitchen table with the name of our father's lawyer written on the outside. I mentioned to Felix casually that I had been thinking of calling a notary. I asked him, with a perfectly innocent expression, whether he knew how long it took to verify old documents. Each time, I watched him. The first mention made him pause for half a second before answering. The second made him busy himself with his phone. The third made the corner of his mouth tighten. He was not scared yet, but he was alert. He was calculating. That evening, he called me into the living room and sat down like he had something important to say. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice slow and careful. "We should probably get a second opinion on the documents, just to make sure everything is in order." I looked at him with wide, open eyes. "That sounds like a good idea," I said. "I trust whatever the professionals say." He studied my face. I held the stillness. Then his phone rang, and he left the room. That night, just before midnight, my phone lit up with his name. I let it ring. The next morning, I went back into the old files, this time looking in a specific place, a cardboard box at the back of the study cupboard my father had never thrown away. It was full of receipts, old bank statements, and loose notes in his careful handwriting. Near the bottom, I found a small brown notebook, a personal ledger. I sat on the study floor and read every page. The entries started simple. Household expenses. Small loans to relatives. But as the pages went on, the entries for Felix grew larger and less regular. Most were not marked repaid. Near the back of the ledger, a page made me stop breathing. My father had written, "Felix asked me to sign the land amendment again. He says the first copy was lost. I am not sure I remember signing it the first time, but he says I did." I signed again. I hope I did the right thing. My father's memory had been excellent until the very end. Someone had told him a document was lost when it was not. That someone had then produced a version with better terms for himself. I wrote everything down in a small notebook I kept hidden in my room. My father had trusted Felix again and again. Felix had used that trust. And now he was doing it to me. I needed him nervous. Not frightened enough to run, but unsettled enough to make mistakes. I chose a Tuesday, a quiet day, when the house felt emptiest. I left a single sheet of paper on the dining table. It looked like a printout from a legal website, information about inheritance fraud and document forgery. I did not circle anything. I did not add a note. I just left it there and went out for 2 hours. When I came back, the paper had been moved. Felix was in the kitchen making food, his back to me. He was humming a tune, but it was slightly too fast, slightly too steady, the kind of humming a person does when they're trying to look relaxed. I made tea and sat down with a book. We stayed in the same room for an hour, both of us pretending. That evening, my phone rang at 10:47 p.m. Felix. I looked at the screen for a long moment, then picked up. "Did you leave something on the table?" he asked. His voice was even, but there was something underneath it. "What do you mean?" I replied. A pause. "Nothing," he said. "Never mind." He hung up. I set the phone down and felt the first real shift in power. He was no longer just watching me. He was now watching himself. A week later, Felix organized a casual family lunch. He invited Aunt Beezy, a cousin named Obinna, and Kechi. It felt relaxed, like a Sunday catch-up. But I had seen Felix use meals before. He was going to say something about the inheritance. He was going to plant more seeds. Halfway through the food, he brought it up. He said our father had spoken to him privately in his final weeks. He said there had been conversations about dividing things more fairly. He said the documents that existed might not reflect what was truly intended. I listened with my chin resting on my hand. When he finished, I spoke quietly. "I would be interested to see anything in writing that supports that," I said. Dad was always very specific about documentation. He believed things should be written down. Felix smiled carefully. "Of course," he said. "These things take time." "I'm in no rush," I said. I looked at Aunt Beezy. She was watching Felix now with an expression I had not seen before. A small doubt, something that had not been there before. Obinna was stirring his drink very slowly, not speaking. Felix felt it too. The room had shifted by less than a degree, but we both felt it. He picked up the conversation about something else, laughing easily. But he did not look at me again for the rest of lunch. 3 days after the lunch, I received a message from a man named Mr. Adeyemi. He was a friend of my father's, one of those quietly powerful people who attended important things but never made noise. He had known our family for over 20 years. His message was brief. He asked if we could meet for coffee. We met at a small place near his office. He ordered nothing and got straight to the point. Felix had contacted him twice in the past month, asking whether he had ever witnessed my father discussing a change to the inheritance arrangements. Mr. Adeyemi had said no both times, because the answer was no. Then Felix had suggested, gently, that perhaps Mr. Adeyemi was misremembering. Mr. Adeyemi's eyes were steady as he told me this. "Your brother is building something," he said. "He is trying to use people who knew your father as part of the structure." He reached into his jacket and placed a folded document on the table. "I kept notes from both conversations," he said, "with dates. If you ever need to show someone what he has been doing, this would help." I looked at the document, then at him. "Are you willing to act on this?" I asked. He nodded once. "When the moment is right," he said, "yes." For the next 10 days, I went completely quiet toward Felix. I did not start conversations. I answered only when necessary. I did not leave any more clues on tables. I stopped mentioning lawyers or documents or any of it. I became, as far as he could see, someone who had backed down, someone tired and sad, and a little overwhelmed. I watched the effect from a careful distance. He started appearing at family gatherings with more confidence. He spoke about the house using full ownership language, saying things like, "when I sort out the property," and "the changes I'm planning." Obinna sent me a small voice note just to check in. "Felix is telling people he's handling things," he said, with a question in his tone. I replied that I was fine, and not to worry. I could feel Felix's confidence expanding to fill the space my silence was creating. He was moving faster now, the way water rushes into a gap. He was making promises he had not yet earned the right to make. And with every promise, with every boast, with every careless word, he was handing me something I could use. I kept every note, every date, every name he dropped in those conversations that found their way back to me. He thought my silence was surrender. It was not. It was preparation. I created the fake clause on a Wednesday afternoon, working slowly and carefully using basic document formatting to make it look like a genuine addendum to the original papers. The clause stated that in the event of a dispute over property, a 60-day review period was required before any transfer could be finalized. Vague enough to sound real, specific enough to seem official. I printed it on plain paper, folded it twice, and placed it loosely inside a folder of old household documents in the study, the kind of folder Felix had already searched twice. I went out for 2 hours. When I returned, the folder had been moved. Not back to its original place, but close. He had been in there. He had found it. I checked his face at dinner. He was very calm, almost too calm, the way a person becomes when they have just found something important and are deciding what to do with it. Over the next 2 days, he made a phone call in the garden that he dropped to a whisper when I walked past. He drove to town alone and came back with a folder under his arm. On the 3rd day, I heard him say into his phone, "I need you to look at something before we move forward." He had taken the fake clause to a lawyer. Without asking me, without telling me, he had walked himself directly into the next part of the plan. Felix called another family dinner. This one felt more formal. He asked Aunt Beezy to come and 2 older relatives I had not seen since the funeral. He set the table with care. He made proper food. I sat at my usual place and waited. Halfway through the meal, he brought out documents. He placed them on the table with the careful confidence of a man presenting evidence. He explained that he had been reviewing the inheritance materials and had found some things that needed to be discussed as a family. He held up the fake clause and read it aloud, slowly, in his most serious voice. He explained that this 60-day review period meant nothing could be finalized yet. He looked around the table with the expression of a man doing a difficult but necessary thing. When he finished, the table was quiet. I let the quiet sit for a moment. Then I said, gently, "I have the original documents in a safe place. All of them, including the ones that were signed and witnessed." I looked at no one in particular. "I'm glad we're all talking about this together." Aunt Beezy looked between us. One of the older relatives cleared his throat. Felix's smile stayed on his face but became slightly fixed, the way a light flickers when something is wrong with the wiring. He had just shown everyone a document. He did not yet know it was mine. He noticed something was wrong 3 days later. I saw it happen in real time at the kitchen counter while he was making coffee. He had his phone out and was reading something, probably a reply from the lawyer he had consulted. His hand stopped moving. He read the message again. Then he looked up and found me standing in the doorway. I was holding a cup of tea and looking at him with a perfectly ordinary expression. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said, "Where exactly did you find that clause document?" His voice was careful, but his eyes were not. I tilted my head slightly. "Which document?" I asked. He blinked. The question was a small trap, and he had walked into it by asking. If he named it, he confirmed he had taken it from the study folder. If he did not name it, he had nothing. He chose a third path. He laughed, a short, slightly too loud sound, and said, "Never mind, I'm just organizing things." He turned back to his coffee. But Obinna had been sitting at the kitchen table the whole time, quietly eating, and he had seen every second of that exchange. I caught his eye as I left the room. He gave me a long, slow look, the kind of look that means, "I see what is happening." I hired a private investigator quietly, through a recommendation from Mr. Adeyemi. Her name was Folake. She was small and precise and charged a fair rate. I met her once, gave her what I had, and let her work. 2 weeks later, she sent me a report. It was thorough. Felix had been moving money through a small account that had been set up using a variation of our family's address. Several transfers had gone into it over the past 4 years, small amounts, irregular but consistent. Some of them lined up with periods when our father had mentioned, in letters I found later, that he was experiencing confusion about his accounts. Folake had also tracked a connection between Felix and a legal consultant 2 towns away, a man who was not a registered attorney but advertised document services online. They had met 3 times in the past 8 months. The most recent meeting had taken place 11 days ago, 4 days after Felix found the fake clause in the study. I read the report twice. Then I called Folake and asked her one question. She confirmed it. The payments to that consultant included a fee for document drafting. Felix was not just planning to claim the property. He had already paid someone to help him create a competing version of the inheritance papers. I needed to know who else in the family was truly on his side and who was simply afraid to speak. I moved through the next week carefully, asking questions in different ways to different people. I told Aunt Beezy, very gently, that I was concerned about some documents that had gone missing and that I was trying to handle things correctly out of respect for our father. She went quiet, then said Felix had told her I was being difficult about the estate. I thanked her and said nothing more. With Nkechi, I was more direct. She was younger and she loved both of us, and I could see the weight of being caught between us was hurting her. I showed her a single page from the ledger, just one entry, the one about the land amendment. She read it twice. She did not say anything for a long moment. Then she said, quietly, "He asked me to confirm a story once, about a meeting with Dad." I said I didn't remember it clearly, because I genuinely didn't. But he kept asking me. She looked up. "I should have told you sooner." I squeezed her hand. Then, through Obinna, I heard that Felix had warned one cousin specifically to be careful what information you share with her. That cousin had passed the warning straight to me. Felix's circle was smaller than he thought. I chose a family gathering the following week to apply a different kind of pressure. It was a low-key Sunday afternoon at Aunt Beezy's house, the kind of event that happened every few months. I arrived early. Before Felix got there, I mentioned to 2 relatives that I had recently made some discoveries about the estate that I would be sharing formally soon. I kept it vague. I looked calm. I used the word formally deliberately because it sounded like lawyers and paperwork and official processes. By the time Felix arrived, there was already a shift in the room. He felt it immediately. He did not know what had been said, only that something had. He came and sat near me, which he had not done in weeks, and tried to make easy conversation. I was warm and relaxed. At one point, he said, "You seem very settled about everything." I looked at him with genuine pleasantness. "I've just been organizing things," I said. His eyes moved over my face, searching. I gave him nothing to find. Later in the evening, I overheard him telling Obinna that he thought everything was basically resolved. Obinna nodded, without speaking. Afterward, Obinna sent me a 1-word message. Nervous. The week before the final meeting, I began leaking small, specific truths to people who I knew would carry them. I told Obinna directly about the ledger and the missing loan repayments. He was not surprised, but he was affected. He had lent Felix money himself once, a smaller amount, and it had never come back. I told Nkechi about Folake's report, just the part about the document consultant. Her face went through 3 different expressions in 10 seconds. I told Mr. Adeyemi that I was almost ready. He said his notes were organized and that he would be available when I called. I did not tell anyone everything. I gave each person the piece that would mean the most to them personally. The effect was gradual but clear. At a brief family gathering midweek, Felix walked in and immediately sensed that the atmosphere had changed. People were not avoiding him exactly, but there was a certain quality of quiet around him, the kind that means people have been talking and have stopped. He made a joke that landed without much laughter. He stayed only 40 minutes before saying he had somewhere to be. 2 relatives contacted me afterward to say they were worried and wanted to understand what was happening. I asked them both to come to a family meeting the following Saturday. I told them it was important. I told them to bring any documents Felix had shared with them. Felix heard about the meeting through Nkechi, who mentioned it, without realizing it would reach him. He called me that same evening, using his most reasonable voice, the warm, concerned older brother tone that had worked on people for years. He said he thought it would be better if we handled things privately, just the two of us, without pulling the whole family in. He said family meetings about money created tension that took years to heal. He was not wrong about that last part. But I knew what he was really saying. A private conversation gave him control of the narrative. A room full of people who had all been told different things did not. I think it's better for everyone if we're all in the same place, I said. Dad always said the clear solutions come when the whole family is together. A brief silence. Are you sure about this? His voice had changed slightly. The warmth was still there, but something harder was underneath it now. Completely, I said. After I hung up, I sat still for a while. He was going to come prepared. He was going to bring whatever he had created. He was going to try to control the room. I thought about everything I had gathered. The ledger. Folek's report. The security footage. Mr. Adeyemi's notes. The fake clause. All of it laid out in order. I was ready. 2 days before the meeting, Folek sent a final update. It was the most important one. The document consultant Felix had been visiting had, in the past week, registered a formal query with a local property records office asking about submitting an amended inheritance declaration. The query had been submitted under a name that was not Felix's, but the address matched a P.O. box Folek had already linked to one of his accounts. He was not just planning. He was moving. He had set a timeline, and I was inside it. If I waited too long, he would file something before I had the chance to act. I called Mr. Adeyemi and told him what I had just learned. He was quiet for a moment. Saturday is the right time, he said. Don't move sooner. If you expose him too early, he adjusts and finds another path. Wait for the room. He'll have nowhere to go. I spent the next 2 days organizing everything into a single folder. Not thick, not dramatic. Just clear. Each document in order. Each piece of evidence with a brief, plain explanation written in my own handwriting. I did not write it to sound impressive. I wrote it so that Aunt Beezy could read it and understand in under 5 minutes. That was the test. If she could follow it, anyone could. Saturday morning arrived gray and still. I woke early and sat with tea for an hour before doing anything else. I thought about my father. I thought about the way he used to say that the truth does not need to be loud, it just needs to be clear. I thought about the 11 minutes Felix had spent at the locked drawer and all the weeks that came after. I had spent those same weeks building something he could not argue against. By 10 o'clock, the living room was arranged with enough chairs for everyone. Water on the table. One copy of my folder at my seat and the others in a bag beside my chair. Felix arrived 30 minutes before the others. He came in carrying a folder of his own, larger than mine. He set it on the table without looking at me. We made small talk about traffic. He seemed wound-tight, but controlled. The others arrived in small groups. Aunt Beezy, Nkechi, Obinna, Mr. Adeyemi, who nodded at me when he walked in. 2 older relatives. One family friend who had known my father well. When everyone had settled, the room went quiet. Felix looked around the table. Then he looked at me. I looked back, calm and open. Thank you all for coming, I said, and I began. I started with my father. I spoke about who he was, how careful he had been, how much he believed in doing things properly, and writing them down. I said that in going through his papers, I had found things I wanted to share, so that everyone had the same information. I kept my voice even, and did not look at Felix while I spoke. I passed the ledger page to Aunt Beezy, and asked her to read it. She did, slowly. I watched her face. Then I placed Folek's summary on the table and explained what had been found, the account, the dates, the transfers. I showed the comparison between the land amendment signatures and other confirmed signatures from the same period. I did not call anyone a liar. I did not say the word fraud. I laid each piece down in order with a brief explanation and let the room do the work. Halfway through, I placed the fake clause on the table, the one I had written myself. I explained clearly that I had created it and left it in the study to see what would happen. Then I placed the lawyer's response that Felix had received after taking it in for review. The room was completely silent. Aunt Beezy had stopped reading and was looking at Felix. His mouth was open slightly. He had not expected this. He had expected a confrontation he could manage. He had not expected documentation. Felix tried. He started with the most obvious move, calling the whole thing a misunderstanding, a series of coincidences that looked worse than they were. His voice was still steady, but his hands were not. He said the ledger was old and incomplete. He said the signature comparison was subjective. He pushed back on each point the way someone does when they have prepared to argue, not when they have prepared to tell the truth. Then Mr. Adeyemi spoke. He read from his notes, quietly and precisely, the dates and content of both conversations in which Felix had asked him to support a false memory. He did not raise his voice. He used complete sentences. The room listened. Obinna followed. He described the money he had lent Felix, which Felix had told him was repaid through a family account. It had not been. He showed a bank statement. Nkechi said only 3 sentences, but they were the most powerful ones in the room. She said Felix had asked her to confirm a meeting she did not believe had happened. She had felt uncomfortable, but had not known what to do. She was sorry she had not spoken sooner. Felix made one last attempt. He said I had fabricated the whole investigation out of jealousy and resentment. The room was quiet. No one agreed with him. No one moved to his side. The silence said everything that needed to be said. The meeting ended in the early afternoon. By the time the last person left, the outcome was clear to everyone in that room. The family, led by the older relatives and Mr. Adeyemi, formally acknowledged that the original inheritance documents were valid and that no competing claim had any legitimate foundation. Felix was asked to return any copies he had made of the original papers and to step back from the estate process. He did not apologize at first. He sat at the table after most people had gone, staring at the surface. Nkechi stayed. Obinna stayed. Eventually, his voice flat and tired, Felix said the words. He said he was sorry. Not the dramatic apology of someone trying to recover their image. Just 2 quiet words, pressed out of him like the last air in a room. I nodded. I did not tell him it was fine because it was not fine. But I told him I heard him. I walked to the window and looked out at the garden my father had planted years ago. Still there. Still growing. Completely indifferent to everything that had happened behind it. I thought about the locked drawer, the silver key, the moment I turned and saw Felix holding those documents with that small, certain smile. He had thought he was holding the end of the story. He was holding the beginning of mine.